Are you ready for a rewarding career in the electrical industry? Quality Electric of the Coastal Carolinas, QECC, is looking for qualified electricians and electrical helpers to join its Charleston team. QECC offers guaranteed full-time hours, make up to $30 per hour with possible performance bonuses and career growth opportunities. Enjoy benefits like health insurance, dental and vision coverage, 401k plans, and more. If you're a motivated, experienced electrician, this job is for you. QECC is an equal opportunity employer. For all job inquiries, send email to hr@qeccinc.com.
This is LBC with Nick Abbott. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent, and he joins me now. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Nick.
You are back from your jolly holidays. Have you been keeping up to date? Because I don't know whether you've heard, but Donald Trump has said that he is ahead in the polls against Barack Obama.
Yes.
And that if Biden gets in again, he's going to take us into World War II.
Yes, and of course immediately start persecuting his political opponents because he argues he has been persecuted. I have to say, one of the joys, I've been out of the country for several weeks, as you know, and one of the joys of being out of the country for several weeks is that you observe all of this madness from afar, and then you realise just how mad it is, and then you come back and actually experience it up close and personal. It's worth just saying, in passing though, that last week, I mean, it was an extraordinary moment when the most feral person in Washington D.C. was not actually Donald Trump or any of the Republicans that he backs, but a British cabinet secretary. I mean, Suella Braverman here, of course, last week, unveiling her desire to tear up all of the laws and treaties that govern asylum. I mean, to the right of any of the Republicans that we saw participating in that appalling TV debate last week. But Donald Trump absolutely ascendant, determined to prove that he is unassailable in the race for the Republican Party's presidential nomination. And he's got a point because he hasn't slipped at all in the polls. He just continues to gain ground. With every indictment that he faces, he cements his position in place as the party's likely standard bearer in next November's presidential election. And it seems, from the vantage point that we have at the moment, that we're in for a rematch. Joe Biden beginning to be under some pressure to reconsider his desire for 4 more years in the White House, although the clock is very much ticking on that conversation, because pretty soon, even if he wanted to drop out, it will be too late because the Democrats would need time to organize a primary campaign. It looks like we're in for a rematch, which is one reason why Joe Biden was making a speech last week once again, warning of the dangers that he says Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again Republicans pose to American democracy, and of course over the last few hours have posed to the functioning of governance here in the United States with that now averted threat of a government shutdown.
Yeah, tell us about that, because this seems to come around quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's just endless. I actually went back through my archive and discovered that the first government shutdown that I covered for LBC was in 1996. I mean, these things come constantly, and this is the only country in the world that goes through this. So what we witnessed over the weekend, the clock was ticking, as you know, and about 3 hours before the government would have shut down, all the voting was complete, and we had this stopgap measure passed that saw the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, forge a deal with Democrats because he couldn't corral members of his own party to back any kind of compromise over Joe Biden's $6.9 trillion spending plan. So a compromise was agreed, but it only kicks the ball down the road for 45 days. Now, in 45 days' time, like most people living in the United States, I will be preparing to roast a turkey for Thanksgiving and bake pies. And we will once again be on the edge of an abyss, peering into that abyss and facing the possibility of a government shutdown. And between now and then, there is now this very thorny issue of funding for Ukraine, because in that compromise measure that was passed on Saturday night up on Capitol Hill, there's no funding for Ukraine whatsoever. That means for the next 45 days, unless some kind of separate legislation is passed in both the House and the Senate, as President Biden is demanding, it's going to be very tough for the United States to offer much in the realm of fresh assistance for Kyiv. Now, President Biden at the White House a few hours ago said that he is absolutely sick and tired of the brinksmanship that constantly leaves American governance and literally the functioning of government, whether people were going to show up in their offices on Monday, whether the parks and the museums were going to be open, whether America's poorest were going to get their benefits and their food stamps on time, leaves all of that hanging by a thread. And he urged Republicans on Capitol Hill to end the games and to find a way of avoiding all of this in the future. And tellingly today, he did concede that this really damages America on the world stage at a time when Joe Biden keeps saying, look, liberal democracies need to band together to defeat the threat from autocracies like Russia and China, and that liberal democracies can deliver for their peoples. Well, the idea that, what used to consider itself the shining beacon on the hill can't even keep its government open and now can only keep its government funded for 45 days definitely damages America's luster globally.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing that they have to go through all the time, because it's about how much the government can borrow, is it not? And then they set a target or like a limit, but that limit is so low as to be soon breached,
yes, or
in danger of being breached, and so they have to have another conflab and set another limit, and then another one. It's like sort of, they're like stepping stones, aren't they? Then they're not laid yet, but they have to lay the one in front of the one they've just stepped on, rather than just laying a path that they can walk down.
Yeah, and it also relates to the constitutional system of governance here. So anyone that's studied American politics will know that the president proposes, Congress disposes. And the only thing that President Biden can do, and what he's done this year, is to say, look, I'd like to spend $6.9 trillion in 2024. And who among us wouldn't like to spend $6.9 trillion if we could raise it? But he's got to get the backing of Congress to do it. And you've got Republicans on Capitol Hill across the board who say that's a ludicrous number. You're addicted to public spending. You want to spend money like a drunken sailor. The Biden team says, look, at the heart of Bidenomics is spending money to make money. You've got to build the economy, as Joe Biden always puts it, from the bottom up and from the middle out. And government can be useful in terms of sparking economic growth and development through some of the major infrastructure projects and other development projects that Joe Biden has already successfully secured congressional backing for. But this time round, we're just over a year. We're 13 months away from America's presidential election, when, of course, a third of the Senate and the entire House of Representatives will be up for grabs. So this was always going to be a very politicized discussion this year, but you've got Republicans, particularly from the Trump-backed far-right wing of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives, saying not only that they want to gut the budget generally and cure Biden of his addiction to public spending, but what they also want to do is completely shred any sense of support for Ukraine. I mean, there is that Russia-leaning wing of the Republican Party that wants to deny Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainians any more support whatsoever, which is why for the next, couple of weeks at least, maybe longer, Ukraine is going to be a very, very hot political potato here in Washington. It was notable, by the way, last week that the other candidates, the non-Trump candidates, because he didn't show up for the debate again, but the 7 of them that did show up for that debate found themselves debating in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley in California. And, you know, Ronald Reagan at this point wouldn't secure a Republican Party membership card. He'd be considered so far to the left, he wouldn't have found house room at the debate that was taking place at his own presidential library. That's how far they've moved.
And am I right in thinking that the Republican Party is obsessed with the deficit when they're out of power, but are completely unconcerned by it when they're in power?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we saw that, of course, during the Trump era, and who knows, we might see it during Trump 2.0. I mean, every single successive American government passes the buck, literally the bucks, onto the next generation, and then chides the opposing party when they're in government for doing exactly the same. But America's national debt is crippling. As we saw a few weeks ago, they were approaching the limit, the debt ceiling, and there was this threat that the United States would not be able to service its debts without a congressional agreement to raise the debt ceiling. They struck that agreement then. But as we get closer to that presidential election of next November, those kind of deals across the aisle are going to get harder and harder as particularly Republican members of Congress want to prove that they are extremely abstemious with the public purse before they go before constituencies in parts of the country where that message sells.
Now, we talked briefly about Donald Trump. I believe he has 91 charges against him, some of which are about to be heard in New York. Is that right?
Yes, 91 criminal counts and counting, as they always say in the James Bond movies. He's teasing at the notion that he might be in New York tomorrow, where a civil trial is going to begin related to Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who is pursuing Donald Trump for fraud. There was a summary judgment in that case last week from the judge who said, oh, absolutely, he committed fraud. He completely overvalued his businesses in a bid to, and you and I have discussed this before, in a bid to secure favourable loans from banks and other financial institutions. And the judge in the case not only said that on that particular issue, which is just one of the various charges that he faces in this trial, on that particular issue, Donald Trump had been living in a fantasy world in terms of the valuations that he was placing on his businesses. But the judge also laid the groundwork that could see Letitia James basically finding herself in charge of the future of the Trump organization. And business analysts believe that this trial is currently, this legal process is going so badly for Donald Trump that he may simply find his organization dismembered by the authorities. His entire business operation could be turned over to a receiver who could take control of the business and liquidate its assets. Trump and his co-defendants could be required to pay a $250 million fine, which is the amount that Letitia James, the Attorney General, demanded in the criminal complaint that she filed last year. And thirdly, she could permanently ban Donald Trump and his sons from doing business in New York State. Now, we're not at that stage yet, but any of those issues coming to the fore would be a substantial blow for the former president, and they could come right in the middle of the presidential campaign when his attention will obviously be much more diverted on the campaign trail than it will be on the daily running of the business.
It doesn't get boring, does it?
Never gets boring, Nick.
And this is happening in New York. Now, we've seen some incredible pictures of what's happened in New York with the storm that they've just had. What's the situation there now?
Well, the clean-up's underway. I've actually, my wife has actually spent the weekend in New York City and says it's not been too bad there this weekend in terms of getting around. But I mean, the city, as you will have seen from the pictures, absolutely, completely drenched by that flash flood that descended on New York City. Record rainfall, a state of emergency declared, and the city once again proving that its infrastructure just is not able to cope with the kind of of extreme weather that hits the Big Apple now on a continuing basis. I mean, time and again now we've seen pictures of subway stations where, torrential rain is just cascading down the stairs, into the stations, down onto the platforms. The sewer system in the city can't handle the kind of rain that it had again just over the last few days, but we saw that a couple of years ago. We saw it as recently as early as 2011 when the sewer system started having difficulties. So, I mean, all of this speaks to the need, and the Biden administration would argue it speaks to the need for more public expenditure to try and protect cities like New York and others from the extreme weather patterns that the country is facing. It will come as no surprise to you that Donald Trump doesn't buy that argument, and the Republicans generally on Capitol Hill don't buy that argument, and so they wanted to strip much of the climate change funding from President Biden's budget, arguing that it's all unnecessary and it's just a blip.
I heard that in New York it got so bad, even the rats said they were leaving.
Well, there was a sea lion that escaped from Central Park Zoo. Did you see that?
Right.
Yeah, made a swim for it.
Yeah. Simon, great to talk to you. Thanks very much. That's Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent.
When it comes to business travel in Orlando, it's never business as usual. Sure, I could go on for days about all the incredible places to hold meetings, or the Michelin dining, or the breadth of industries that call it home. But when it's time for your business to make the extraordinary happen, Albert Monero of Limitless Solutions said it best. Orlando is an incredible place for innovation. So dive in and see what's happening in Orlando, where the possibilities for business travel are unbelievably real. Learn more at orlandoforbusiness.com.